All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today at this session of the Privacy Exchange Community Show and Tell series with our very special guest, Shelley Bauer. Shelley has one of the most interesting paths into privacy that I've ever seen, so it's a pleasure to have you join us today. Shelley grew up on a farm, and unfortunately, that farm went bankrupt. No subsidies. Her parents had to reinvent themselves, and her grandparents and the community helped raise Shelley during that time. And that taught her resourcefulness that is just an incredible different life experience. Shelley went ahead and took that resourcefulness and then served for 5 years in the Air Force, where she led teams of up to 420 people in a 24-hour aircraft maintenance operation. She managed programs there worth up to $8.4 billion and commanded relief response during Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Her military experience gave her something rare: authentic, high-performing teamwork and the freedom to operate under pressure. More than a decade later, Shelley went on to law school and found herself doing something surprisingly similar, which is what we hope to talk about today during this session. She worked as an attorney doing business operations for life sciences research and development, and in that process navigated heavily regulated environments with complex contracts. Now, Shelley is a business owner. She is self-employed as what she calls a legal wrangler, helping teams cut through the chaos of privacy compliance, especially around technology. She is passionate about solving real problems instead of managing optics. And the way she puts it, you won't hear me say we need another slide deck, which I think is pretty funny, Shelley. So
Thanks.
today, Shelley, what we really want to hear about is your approach to operationalizing privacy, ways that you've been resourceful and how you've simplified complex processes, and also your approach to leading with empathy to develop high-performing teams. So for the folks joining us today, here's how we're going to spend the next 25 minutes. Shelley and I will have a chat for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will open it up to audience Q&A. At that time, we will turn off the recording, so please feel free to ask whatever questions you'd like. As a reminder, the information shared today is for general information purposes only and is not legal advice. Although Shelley is a lawyer, she's not your lawyer, or at least right now. So if you need legal advice, please contact your own legal counsel. All right, with that all behind us, let's hop in. Shelley, you are self-employed as the legal wrangler that I mentioned earlier, but can you tell us a little bit more what that means and the type of companies or people you work with and what problems you solve?
Sure. Thank you for having me on here. I have been really appreciating everything that you guys have been doing the past year or so that I've been involved. And now I'm just like, oh, this is amazing. Now I get to contribute back. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh,
Um, so I I help leaders and teams prioritize and operationalize the plethora of regulations and legal requirements that are coming out almost day to day sometimes. And this impacts the what do I want to say? It impacts the ability to drive revenue and affects the overall bottom line, P&L. Or as I put it in my head, how do we accomplish the mission? Like, what are we doing here? Like, what actually matters? And sometimes when I join organizations, especially as a new employee, that is not clear. Like, what is the mission? What are we doing? It's very unclear because most of the time, a lot of teams are just fighting fires, like auto response, reacting, and 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 it's not organized in a way where people actually know where they're contributing. And so the three things that I notice with everyone I work with is there's pressure to use technology and AI, right? The second part is some of these teams are recovering from their initial implementation of technology or AI. And then there's usually a backlog or saturated workload that puts these leaders in this position where they're like, what now? Like, I don't even know where to start. How do we cut through this? Because there's so much noise It's hard to determine what's actually problems versus response to noise. And so as the legal wrangler, I bring in all of this information and data, do a discovery process, and help leaders determine that, and then next steps.
Oh, that is fascinating. I can see it when you're in the thick of things and always responding to, emergencies or crises, that it's hard to see the bigger picture. And even asking that question is like, what is the actual goal? People can get really far away from that, especially in high pressure cooker departments like compliance, because you're right, it
Yes.
does impact the bottom line. My second question for you relates to how you can perform under pressure. So, a lot of privacy pros do face a lot of pressure, but in your case, probably haven't commanded hurricane relief or led, billion-dollar aircraft maintenance teams. So, I'm curious about how your work in those high pressure fields impact what you do today, and how you realize all of these different experiences are connected and what lessons you can bring to the clients you have today.
Sure. Okay, so quick story. In the military, when you start, you go through boot camp. There is so much noise, so many different game-changing rules by the minute because you have drill sergeants and military training instructors just constantly on you, right? And you still have to perform. You can't lose sight of the mission. What are you there for? What are you trying to do? And so this environment trained us to tune out the noise, tune out the chaos, and keep eyes on the mission and the goal ahead. And so I use some of that, right? I use some of that in my thought process, like what is the corporate terminology? Moving the needle. I think that's used a lot, right? Um, and the other part is when we think about aircraft, we think of it as a huge machine. It's a very complex machine. In reality, when we break that down into systems, it's much more manageable. So an engine is like a human heart that's pumping the fuel to make it work. The flight deck is the brain. That's what's telling the machine what to do. And then the electric wires is our central nervous system. And so, like medical care, you have specialists and they're experts in those systems and subsystems. And on the farm, so jumping back to my farm, that was all resource management. We didn't have many, so we had to get creative. Who has the stuff we don't need? We don't need necessarily. Who has the stuff that we need but we can't afford? What can we barter? What can we exchange? So maybe we can trade resources and break down the silos of what we each have to offer and share and basically cross-train into these different areas. So as a leader in aircraft maintenance, I learned how to use my resources, right? So I'm not an expert. I don't know how to work on these systems, but I learn from the experts what they need to work on their systems. And so when I start seeing the connections between the systems and subsystems, who are the experts involved, I can help and translate to the other communities or the other silos of experts, and then bring back that information and then start developing that interconnectedness and interdependence to make the whole thing work. The same is true for all of these regulations. They're all separate systems, but if we look at it as one machine, we're all working interconnectedly in an organization to make it happen to accomplish the mission.
Okay, that is fascinating. I feel like you're bringing a level of clarity to people that are trying to sync up. They're just like missing, like to your point, the bigger picture. And then what you said about resource constraints was actually very interesting to me because I do feel like folks in the privacy world are oftentimes resource constrained, whether that's budgets, people, um,
Yes.
legal outside legal help, all of that. It's always a challenge. But maybe instead of looking at that as like, oh no, you can look at it, okay, this is going to help me prioritize what I need to do right now versus what I could put off next season, like in the farm example that
Yes.
you mentioned. So I'm curious, Shelley, can you tell us a little bit more about a privacy challenge that you cracked or helped crack? And you don't have to go into specifics about your
Yeah,
clients, but using this kind of thinking, like just anything you can share.
sure. So I was thinking about how when I came into clinical trial contract work,
Mhm.
I was anticipating, I look at some contracts, I reword some things, do some negotiations, and it's done. Voila. It
Yeah.
is not, it is not that at all. As it turns out, um, my my position, I learned, was much more involved, as in, um, does the protocol, the research protocol, the steps involved in the research, does that match the obligations and requirements in the contract? So I had to learn science. What's actually going on in the technical steps? Are we covered in this contract with the correct liability, right? And not just that, what does our marketing and our pamphlets say? Does the marketing language reflect what we're actually going to do and what we anticipate to come out of this research? Not just that, we have informed consent forms. Here's the biggest privacy part and data protection part of all of it. Are we able to speak the language that our audience, our participant patients, understand? There's something about our patients that are very unique and that they cover a wide variety of backgrounds. Some of them have never been to school. Some of them have, higher educational degrees. Some of them are certified in engineering only, right? Like they don't know the soft side. Like what are the emotional effects of this? They know like cause effect, which is all wonderful. But then the next thing is, are we training our people who are explaining what's happening to diversify in the way they speak to the patient? So can they speak the language that our audience understands? And does our language in the informed consent explicitly say what are the risks, how, which data of theirs will be used, and then what happens after? Who maintains control? How does this evolve, or does this move through the ecosystem of research? And and so all of these are systems and subsystems within one process with the overall goal of conducting research.
Okay, so this is like, again, what are we trying to do here?
What are
And
we
then
doing?
sure all of the subcomponents align to that same goal. It's really interesting to me that, and I'm super happy to hear you had such a hands-on role and it wasn't just reviewing some contracts, changing a few words here and there, but it was really making sure what happened in real life was what you reflected on, like basically a values document. Like this is what we're gonna do, and it's do what you said you were gonna do, or realign that. I'm really happy to hear you mention the marketing piece too, because I've been reading a lot of news articles where they cite marketing pieces and they're like, this is what XYZ company said they were
Yes.
doing, but this was the actual practice. So, love to hear that. So, getting back to like managing optics, I know you are very against that, just, making it look pretty on the outside. And you're against just building another deck. So tell us about a time where you had to get resourceful with your privacy, to avoid just, privacy theater, I guess you could call it, and actually get to the core of a problem. And if you could walk us through another example, that'd be great.
Sure. I Something that I kind of love is when society is moving into such tech-based, right? We're so technology, AI, everything's faster, more efficient. I kind of appreciate that my background didn't start completely in technology, because now analog is the new resourcefulness.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like not using technology at all is the most the most secure way to do something.
Yeah.
And so before I became a lawyer, I worked at a hospital and I was an emergency department clerk. And then later I was an assistant to the chief quality officer. And there we went through patient medical records to make sure that we were in compliance with Medicaid and Medicare requirements. And that doctors were charting the way they were supposed to, nurses were charting the way they're supposed to, whatever. Very boring. I'm going to tell you straight up, very boring. Very interesting, but
Yes.
boring.
Yeah.
And part of Chief Quality Officer's questions were like, are we complying with HIPAA operationally with the clerks and people who answer phones and the help desk and all of that as well, right? We don't have charts to review for them. So we developed questions, and I got to employ the old junior high favorite of crank calls. So I so we developed some questions that were not easily discernible that it was a HIPAA something. And we got a team of people and we started crank calling the hospital help desks and reception desks to see how much information we could get from them and whether or not they were violating or in compliance with HIPAA. And it was hilarious. It was a different skill set to keep a straight face and not laugh, right? And then keep track. What are the trends? What are the scenarios? Because humans want to help. They innately want to help, especially in a hospital environment. And from there, we could prioritize the training and know like, oh, we got to hit this a little harder, or we have to give more specific examples so they understand how it impacts them.
Oh,
And
I love that. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's interesting because you were saying we were in this like technology driven AI era, but really part of the solution and part of the problem is really human beings. So in this case, human beings
yes,
want to help because it's in our nature. But then also, human beings being capable of doing things technology isn't, right? Like those types
yeah.
of reviews you were saying. When you were mentioning that, what came to mind was like how every company is like, let's just vibe code now. And now, second generation, they're like, oh, we need a person who understands what they're doing to check the vibe coding to make sure it's not riddled with errors. So I love to hear that like the analog human touch, like your expertise is coming back in vogue, despite all of the, technological changes we're living through right now. I have one final question, Shelley, before we open it to audience Q&A. Um, and that is related to our last talk here. And we're all trying to figure out privacy and AI governance as we go. So how are you approaching it with clients? When all the technology is changing, all the rules are changing, like how do you lead with empathy for their situation, but trying to get it right? How does it all work? What are your strategies?
Well, I will say that I love working with leaders who understand that there's more to the picture that they don't know. So I've learned along the way that some people in leadership positions are not in a position to admit that they don't know. And that becomes its own conversation. And I find it more fun when they're already there. They're already like, hey, here's what I've noticed. What do
Oh,
you think? Right? And then from there, I'm like, ah, now we can have fun and it'll be frustrating and it will be challenging and there will be rewards at the end. So I I firmly believe in structured discipline, that meaning framework. If you don't know your mission and you don't know where we're headed, how in the world can we ever adapt when we're always adapting? That like it doesn't make sense. And there's room for revenue leak and it just leads to more loss that can be preventable in the end. So with that, I my empathy is is trying to figure out where they are in their self-awareness journey, one, and if they are fearful of their job, then that's a different strategy, right? We're going to take a more safer route. If they are much more courageous and they are not worried about that, then we can start like really delving in and figuring out what's the actual root problem without having fear that it scares them to the point where like, oh, but we can't do that. Oh, but we can't do that. Because fear-based leadership usually results in band-aid fixes and workarounds. And band-aid fixes and workarounds are then amplified when instituting technology and AI. So this is how we get to root problem, fixing processes, having that courage to say, you know what, our baby's ugly, and and we gotta get some stuff straightened out. And not all of this is actually on us to resolve, our team to resolve. There are other experts who are in a much better position to answer these questions. This workload saturation is partly our fault because we allow it, because we are so responsive, because we do answer everything, when maybe it's not ours. Maybe we should stick to the stuff that is best for our team to handle, that nobody else can handle, and let the other teams and the other leadership handle that stuff that belongs in their world. And with that, I have a lot of conviction with establishing ownership and expectation management. And if everybody knows the rules, then everybody can comply. And a lot of times our leaders aren't always aware of what their team is having to do on a day-to-day basis just to get stuff done. And sometimes that awareness can help those leaders better understand how the policies are not actually helping. So that would
Yeah.
be the other thing.
So really, again, kind of to bring this back to what you were saying at the top, know the mission, develop a framework, set expectations, ownership, do your part, let other people do their part, and that helps the machine operate together. Let's get the
Yes,
plane flying, not just this part working, not just that part working, but flying, the real mission. So,
correct.
Shelley, it
Yes.
was incredible to talk to you. Let's go ahead and turn off the recording, and open this up for audience Q&A.